With the release of Advent of Genesis, a few strategies that we already know were going to be extremely good are leaning on some kind of valuable cards. While I don't think they're going to be perfect substitutions, I do think we can, however, find a few budget options for some of the key strategies while you're still working towards your playset of legendaries. Hey everybody, Espira, and today we're going to be checking out a couple of cards. I've stuck to the ones that are all about 10 bucks and above. I believe that's only about 4 or 5 cards worth replacing, but are very core cards to their strategies. So we're going to be looking at those legendaries. Actually, there's one gold card. I wonder which one it is. And we'll be looking to see how we could potentially replace them. Do note, like I was saying, they're not perfect one-for-one replacements. There's a reason that these cards are worth what they are. They're as good as they are. I still stand that these cards will actually go back to being cheaper if you hold out a couple of weeks. But naturally, if you still want to play strategies like D-Shift or like Ramp Dragons, I do think there's at least a couple of options to kind of make it easier to transition into as you're working towards getting those cards. So with that said, the first kickoff will be Merlin. Merlin has been seeing an insane price spike over the last couple of days. Started off at about 13 bucks. Now she's up to 30. I don't have that much of an ego to say it's my fault, but the price spike did bounce up even higher after I released my video, so who knows. But either way, if you guys want to check out the top 10 legendaries, link will be in the top right corner. So with that said, Merlin does two amazing things. Not only does her base form actually allow you to tutor anything out of the deck, and that's probably the most powerful thing, is that she's able to dig you exactly what you need. Tutors are incredibly powerful. It's an incredibly cheap cost, and on Evo, she actually allows you to play one that costs 3 or less. So you're getting double value of not only being a tutor, but getting triple usage on your other spells. So she's like copies 4 through 6 of your spells, depending on which one you're trying to use, which is incredibly, incredibly good. With that said, what are we really trying to do with Merlin? I think the most important part is definitely the tutor. And that you can just get by going deeper into your deck. So examples of that, we got Spectral Wizard. Evolve this follower for 2. Otherwise, it's a 2/2 with fanfare like a top card of your deck. If it's a spell, you may reveal it and add it to your hand. Again, just going for some dig, right? It's like, okay, is it a spell? Which we're in Runecraft, most things are. Okay, we're going to draw. These kinds of things are typically what we're going for. Spectral Wizard not being awesome in the sense that, like, if it's not a spell, it just stays there and you didn't help your dig at all. But at least it gives you that option. And then the Evolve form, on Evolve, discard a spell, select that enemy follower on the field and deal 4 damage to it. It's like modular in the sense of, like, whereas Merlin is able to reuse any 3-cost spell, this Spectral Wizard can turn any spell, whether it's like dead in the matchup or not, into removal. So it's not perfect. It definitely doesn't really do that good of a Merlin impression, but it's kind of similar in vein, and it's a 2-cost, so it kind of fits the curve in a very similar slot. It gives you something. Alternatively, you can go with Sammy, Wizard's Apprentice. So it evolves for 2, so it's a 1-drop that can evolve for 2, and then fanfare like a top card of your deck, you may put it into your cemetery. And it's a little bit more consistent in the sense where, unlike Spectral Wizard, where sometimes they'll just stay, this one you can always just dump it, and if it's a card you want to draw, you can just kind of leave it there. It's not perfect, but it does something. And then on Evolve, you get to draw a card. Both players draw a card. You hate having to draw a card for your opponent. That one's kind of but it's a dig, and if you know it's on top of your deck, and if you're looking for a D-Shift, and then you see it's a D-Shift, then you can go ahead and draw it, and then maybe win the game. I don't know. It's tough to say. There's not that many great options for Merlin because Merlin is so incredibly pushed. Merlin is a card that's going to stand the test of time for 5, 6, 7, 8 sets in, because power creeping her is incredibly hard, because like she's the design of like 2 or 3 stacked cards all in one. Like both her effects on the backside and the front side are things that could just be on spells, but they're on a body on top of that. So she's incredibly good. She's incredibly hard to replace. But I think at the moment with the card pool we have access to right now, these are kind of our best options outside of just saying like, hey, play more draw cards and hope you draw out, which unfortunately there's not that many more when you already consider what Runecraft decks are already including for card draw. And that's what I'm trying to hit the balance of. It's like cards that people aren't already auto-including. So me saying replace, X with Z, even though it's already in most deck lists, kind of doesn't help. Regardless, moving from Merlin, we do have the face card of the set. Lucifer did also have a price spike going from about 15 bucks a pop, now sitting at about 30. Again, I do think that's going to go down over time. We are still not even a week into release, but nevertheless, people are picking up their copies and he has spiked up. And Lucifer is kind of weird because he's a double purpose card, which makes it hard to replace 1-for-1. I mean, they're all hard to replace 1-for-1, but Lucifer specifically is on the front side at 6/7 with ward and also gains you 4 life. So it allows you to stabilize. It's a big chunky body that's hard to remove. But then on the Evolve side, he's got Bane and says that he'll deal 4 at the end of the turn to your opponent. So you have one that can be like, hey, we just need to stabilize the board. We need to chill out. All right, cool. We're going to go ahead and have a big body, and then I'm going to heal. Or alternatively, we have a guy that says, I'm just going to deal damage. Also, whatever you swing him, he's going to die. So he's like removal in that sense as well, because of course he gains rush because he had just evolved. So that dual purpose is really tough. So you kind of have to pick and choose your battle there on whether you want an aggressive card or you want yourself a defensive card. So to kick it off, first we've got Goblin Demon. It can evo for 0. Otherwise, for 5 cost, you get a 6/6 reward. Does have fanfare to deal 2 damage to each other follower on your field. So that's tough. But naturally, if you're playing a deck that plays Lucifer, you're kind of a bigger deck, so you maybe don't mind that. And then the chunky body is just kind of what you're looking for. It is definitely not amazing, but it is an option in regards to giving you a big ward body. Otherwise, if you're looking for the finisher side of things, that's going to be very class specific. There's no real neutral finisher that's on like the same kind of stature in how Lucifer plays out, right? He's not like a storm body that rushes down your opponent, in which we're going to see something very similar to that over in the next card. He's more of just a big stat body, can apply pressure, can be like removal. So in that sense, you have to look into your class and kind of figure what's best. For dragons, you go with Fafnir, deal 5 damage to each enemy follower on the field. So it's a board wipe that's also followed by a 7/8, which is very well statted. Or let's say here we've got Curate, which is a 5/5 for 6. Give your leader +5 health, draw a card. So there you have the more survival aspects of it. Again, Lucifer is so good because he does both off of technically 1 card. I consider the Evos basically kind of 1 card, even though they take a slot in your Evo deck. Whereas you kind of have to pick and choose specifically whether you're going for the defensive stuff or for more the finisher side stuff separately when you're looking at replacing Lucifer, at least in set 1. Then we've got Dark Dragoon Forte, an incredibly good card for 4. It's a 5/1 storm. And then if you Evo for 2, it's a storm that also has aura, which means it has protection. So for 6, you're swinging at your opponent for 7, and it's protected, which means they won't be able to quick it. So they have to like proactively have a way to prevent this from happening, either via a ward or something like that. So that burst damage is incredibly good. The biggest part being the protection is the fact that you can get her. Because if all we cared about was the storm for like kind of similar cost, you could just look at Gilgamesh, which is a 7 cost. So it does cost 1 more than the evolve form, but it's a 6/6 storm, right? Like if that's all you were looking for, you definitely have a good option in that card. Alternatively, if you're looking for something more of like the finisher style, like big damage, you could go Genesis Dragon, which just has Storm, or you could go with Flame and Glass. Costs more, of course, but it is a 7 storm that also deals 3 damage to each enemy follower, which has its benefits. Whereas Forte is going to get prevented from going in via ward and doesn't have a big butt, which means she actually can probably die depending on any ward that blocks her. Flame and Glass can actually potentially get rid of them if they're a little bit weaker, but of course she costs a ton. But hey, if you can play Flame and Glass, maybe you tech in a couple of flames and glasses into your deck and you get the full combo off to deal 7 damage to the entire board, and then that's kind of neat. I'm not saying that's where you should go, but it is definitely a shell that can allow for it, especially if you don't currently have your Fortes available. Moving on from a Forte, we've got Cerberus, which is just like such a good mid-range piece, right? Like Cerberus is kind of interesting because she fills the niche of just kind of being like an everything card. She's a body that also has a little bit of removal, can be like really well statted depending on how your stuff lines up with the necro charges, so you can get both a Mimi and a Coco. And then on the evolve form, you just get it additionally even more for an evil cost of 2. So for 6, you're getting like some 4 toughness worth of stats. You're getting 4 damage as removal. So this is kind of a lot on a singular card, but we can kind of get similar ideas. Again, very similar to Lucifer. It's the fact that you're getting multiple stuff off of 1 card. Here, you're more so picking and choosing. So initially, my first option I was thinking of was a Playful Necromancer, which is a 3/3 for 3, and then gets to evolve for 1, where you get to summon 3 ghost tokens. Ghost tokens being 1/1s with Storm that also banish themselves at the end of the turn. Kind of neat, right? For about the same cost, you do have the ability to have a 4/4 on the board, which means you get a little bit of a higher stat, and you can use the ghosts as removal. They don't need to go face. They can go face if you like, but alternatively, you can just go ahead and bash them into your opponent's board and kind of, deal 3 damage across as opposed to 2. Naturally, it's not as much as a Cerberus would her own if she were to evo with like having necro charge and everything, but at least those options are there. If we're not going for that angle, alternatively, you could do Medusa, which is a 6 cost 6/6 that can activate Exhaust to be able to destroy spirits. So it's just straight destruction, which is really strong. And the 6/6 that's really good, especially when you account for the fact that if you have Sanguine and you have Necrocharge 10, she actually costs 4. So now you have a 4 cost 6/6 that's able to remove something off the board the turn it comes out. Again, not as flexible as Cerberus, especially since the fact that you do need to meet a couple of conditions to be able to get it down to that 4 cost, but it can fill a decent role in a mid-range package if that's really kind of what you're looking to replace Cerberus for. Finally, alternatively, you could go with Queen Vampire. She does cost a hard 6, so both the evo cost and the base cost for Cerberus, but she does come with 2 bats. Additionally, those bats will get a little bit of a buff and ward, so they create kind of like a protection. Not as good. Honestly, I'm not super high on Queen Vampire, but if you have the starter deck, she's definitely an option that you should consider and will slot within very similar veins of what Cerberus is trying to do. Now, moving on from that, the next card we have for budget options. Okay, so realistically, I'm memeing, but like, no, Bellringer Angel doesn't really have a replacement. There's a reason she's still used as a pivotal 1-drop, even in like set 6 in the Japan meta, I think. And it's just because what she does is just incredibly well statted. Yeah, she doesn't do damage, but she's an O2 with ward, which means she'll always be a ward, which is something your opponent's always going to have to at least have removed for, even if you draw it late game, and then she just draws you a card. Could draw you into a quick that maybe gets you an out. So early game, decent. Late game, it's not the worst card because at least she draws you a card, so it does cantrip. So it's tough to say, right? Like, you could replace her with, like, I think there's a Goblin 1-drop that's like a 2/2, but like that's like for more aggro strategies, right? Like, that's not necessarily why you're playing Bellringer Angel, but you can kind of use it like removal for your own opponent's followers. So tough to say. Unfortunately, this is one of those cards that if it were replaceable, it wouldn't be as expensive as it is. I think right now the base version is sitting at like $30 a pop. I don't think that's going anywhere. Unfortunate, but that just kind of is the reality for now and will be for the future. I think as we get more class cards will be able to fill that 1-drop slot and at least make it easier to have to consider not running Bellringer Angel. But at the moment, unfortunately, it's a concession I'm going to have to make that I don't believe we have a great ton options in terms of the kinds of things and roles that Bellringer Angel fills in a deck. With that said, guys, those are my current budget recommendations if you're trying to swap out a couple of cards as you're slowly building towards optimizing your decks. Thankfully, I do think this isn't too bad. There are a couple of cards that were $30, which is kind of nuts, but the rest of the set is very much affordable, which means that there are a lot of different paths you can take. And if you happen to not be in the classes that require the cards that we were seeing, Ding Dong being a little bit of an exception, but you know, that just kind of is what it is. I think there's a lot of room to be able to build a lot of great strategies and still have a good amount of success. But if you guys have any recommendations that I have not recommended here, let me know in the comments down below. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.